Democrats have been rigging and stealing elections for decades, probably starting back with JFK in the state of Illinois. Today, however, I want to focus on the truth that is coming out of the state of Georgia. I want to first show you a video between Benny Johnson and former Trump lawyer Mike Davis over at the Article 3 Project, talking about the different crimes that were committed, the millions and millions of dollars that were spent of taxpayer money, not to get to the truth, but to bury the truth. Why would you spend millions and millions of dollars trying to cover up instead of just exposing the truth? They're going to go through how this was treason and people need to go to jail. On top of that, Emerald Robinson, who's been breaking this Venezuela election rigging and American election rigging story, she brings on Dr. Johnston from the election board, and she talks about the missing ballots, the cover-up of the signatures, the ticker tapes, the machines, all of it. I hope you enjoy all this. Listen to what was said from Benny Johnson, and then we'll go right into the Emerald Robinson report.
So this is a question that I've really wanted to ask you, like sincerely, Mike, is what happens when you're able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that at least 10,000 votes were fraudulent, because that was the margin of victory, that Joe Biden didn't win this state, that these two senators who also won, and it was amazing. I couldn't believe, I was blown away when I was pulling up this data yesterday with Barry Loudermilk, who's a congressman from Georgia. The two senators from Georgia, they won by the exact same margins, exact same vote tallies, same numbers. It was like perfectly algorithmic. And it's like, wait a second, what happens now if you actually say there are illegitimate senators that are serving, that were not duly elected, and that this election didn't go for Joe Biden, it went for Donald? What happens there exactly, constitutionally, Mike?
It's a good question, Ben. I mean, Democrats have been rigging and stealing elections for decades, including Kennedy's. So it's Democrats are very good at this. It's unacceptable. I mean, it's truly unacceptable if, first of all, we know the election in 2020 was rigged and stolen because the Democrats violated the elections clause under the U.S. Constitution by unilaterally using COVID as an excuse to change election laws and not having state legislatures or Congress change the election laws. You can't just do that. That violates the elections clause. And remember what they did with COVID. They used COVID as an excuse to mass mail live ballots out to old voter lists, including college students who have moved 10 times since the last election. These live ballots pile up in mailboxes, in dorms, and apartments. And the only way you can stop the voter fraud is through signature verification. But the Democrats made signature verification meaningless. They turned the machines down to where it would not catch signatures that were wrong because apparently COVID changed our signatures, right? That's the tell that this election was rigged and stolen, is they got rid of signature verification. Mm-hmm. That's separate from the fact that if you have our voting machines hacked and tampered with by foreign governments, that's act of war material. Like that's like that is some bad stuff. That's treason. That's act of war. I mean, if people actually did this, they need to go to prison for the rest of their lives at a minimum.
You saw Fulton County Commissioner Bridget Thorne drop an absolute bombshell about the county after the DOJ raided the election hub in the county the day before. Thorne revealed that the county has spent millions of dollars, millions of taxpayer dollars, their constituents' money, to fight anybody from actually seeing the ballots, election materials, data, all the relevant materials since 2020, even though they admitted they had issues with the elections. So they didn't just spend millions of dollars on corrupt voting machines and corrupt Democrat election operatives. They also spent millions to make sure no one ever laid eyes on the ballots. And the rats are squirming. Here's Allison Steinberg questioning one particular rat on the Hill yesterday, Senator Jon Ossoff. Watch.
Since the polls closed in 2020, the president, bitterly unable to understand that he lost, has spun baseless conspiracy theories claiming that he in fact won. This is a sore loser's crusade and an abuse, in my view, of presidential power and executive branch authority.
And joining us now for the latest developments is Dr. Jan Johnston. She is the rock star, one of them, on the Georgia State Election Board. Do you know how many times we have shown clips from you at these election board meetings on this show, Dr. Johnston? So it's great to finally have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Now, Senator Ossoff from your state says that this is nothing more than a sore loser's crusade. But you and several members of the board have been investigating the fraud that took place in your county, you know, just your county or Fulton County alone. But it's finally going to be investigated by the DOJ. Your thoughts on how the events have developed over the week?
So, Emerald, thanks for having me. I would just say that Senator Ossoff just doesn't get it. This is not about President Trump. This is about the conduct of the election and the accurate counting of the ballots and the votes for the election. This is about elections in Georgia for the people of Georgia. And I just listened to two hysterical Democrats overreacting about the DOJ taking the documents, taking the ballots, taking the laptop, as I understand it, and some phones in order to finally investigate the 2020 election, as we've been trying to do for 4 years.
Dr. Johnston, what Bridget Thorne, who's been on this show as well, had to say yesterday about the amount of money that has been spent, millions of dollars, that's taxpayer dollars, on legal counsel fighting complying with this ballot request. What do you think should be done? What kind of accountability do we need here on the part of Georgia officials?
Emerald, if Fulton County had not spent so many hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to block the ability of the state election board to get the documents, this could have been settled and investigated and reviewed and concluded long ago. But from the moment we subpoenaed the documents, Fulton County lawyered up and started spending taxpayer dollars to prevent the state election board from obtaining the documents regarding our investigation. And when we subpoenaed the ballots, they continued to obstruct and try to block and prevent the state election board from obtaining this information so that we can really look at the 2020 election and confirm exactly how many ballots were cast and how many votes were counted. Although I do not care who won the election, I care that the election was conducted legally and fairly and accurately. And I'll say that over and over again.
What do you think they're going to find with these ballots? There's some concern that perhaps a lot of the evidence has already been destroyed. I talked to somebody at the White House about that. They said, well, even if it has, that within itself is damning. There are people who have worked in Georgia since 2020 suggest that they believe there could be different types of paper ballot, right? Paper for the ballots, suggesting that perhaps some fake ballots are inserted. You've heard testimony from a lot of people, right? Particularly Joe Rossi, who has found thousands of duplicate ballots, found that there are no ballot images for some 17,000 ballots from the 2020 election in Fulton County. What do you expect that investigators at the federal level are going to find when they inspect these ballots, Dr. Johnston?
Emerald, not only are there almost 18,000 missing ballot images from the official recount of the election, there were over 380,000 ballot images that were not kept from the election night itself. So that in itself is a violation of law of destroying election records. And also there are issues with ballots that supposedly were cast that we do not have documents for to prove that they were actually cast on in ballot scanners or into the ballot box that really existed. So there's much to look at. In addition, the latest complaint that we heard in December concerning ballot scanner tabulating tapes that are Fulton County cannot provide or will not provide. I'm not sure which the answer really is, but those are the documents, the paper documents, the paper trail for actually how many ballots were cast and ultimately how many votes were counted. And that those are the documents for the ballot box. So, and that's where certification of our election begins, is at the ballot box, in the polling place, in the precinct. So there's much to look at. We already know there are violations with this 2020 election. The question is to put the whole puzzle together, and the concern now is, was there obstruction or cover up to some of these issues and inconsistencies and discrepancies? And I'm sure the FBI will be looking into all of those possibilities.